Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar session, also being simultaneously live streamed to our LinkedIn page and YouTube channel. If you're joining us there, welcome to the session, and feel free to leave a comment anytime during the session. My name is Satish. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Connixt, and our discussion today is about digital transformation. More specifically, the nuts and bolts of how exactly organizations justify these initiatives. How does the C-suite view these projects? Uh, they sound great to the managers, the lines of business, but why should any CEO or CFO care? To discuss this today on this panel are two very distinguished guests, Krish Dharma and Reid Nuttall, seasoned practitioners who worked in lines of business and now consult and advise and both managers as well as the C-suite. So I'll do a quick round of intros before we jump right in. Krish, I'll go with you first. A 40-year track record driving innovation and change in supply chain operations, IT, and enterprise business transformation. Uh, he has held several senior positions, management positions in supply chain and operations, and is currently leading the supply chain management initiative as a strategic advisor at SEMI, an industry association in electronics design and manufacturing supply chain. Thank you, Krish, for joining us here. Reid has been a CIO in 3 different industries and has deep experience in selecting, implementing, and applying technology. IT functions he has led have been frequent award winners, such as the Information Week 500, the Computer World 100, and the Utility and Analytics Institute Best Infrastructure Business. He's currently the principal for utilities at Capgemini and is involved in significant businesses and technology change initiatives throughout North America. And for good measure, he was the CIO in the oil and gas industry at one of my very first customers in a previous company. So welcome to this discussion, Krish and Reid. Good to have you both here.
Good to be here.
Good to be here.
So we'll dive right in. I want to start with this. The title of this webinar is Targeted Digital Transformation. Would love to hear your perspective on targeted and digital transformation. So go ahead, please.
I'll dive in, and particularly about the word targeted, because everyone's been talking about digitalization and digital transformation for quite some time. A problem is that so many people treat it as a big project, when in fact, with the miraculous tools that we have nowadays, you can really target your digitalization and have a project that gets something done that has a significant ROI and is very quick. Modern IT departments, they really need to understand what only they can understand. They need to understand their data architecture. They need to understand their integration and integration abilities. However, why do they need to continue to support software packages when you have SaaS, other capabilities, software as a service, and other capabilities in the cloud? Nowadays, you can take some of these tools that you have and cobble together a solution very quickly that's not a big project, that has minimal risk, and they can get the benefits of the digitalization very quickly. So that's why I like the term targeted when you talk about digitalization, because it's action. You're doing something, you're doing it now, and it has permanence because it can last because it's supported by the experts, being a SaaS tool that you are utilizing.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Reid, it's almost like fail fast, right? You try something out, it's agile. You make the process agile in trying something out. If it fails, build it better, and so on and so forth. In my opinion, there's a little subtlety between digitalization and digital transformation, and let me point that out, right? I mean, people tend to use it interchangeably, and perhaps it's a nuance, but nonetheless, digitization is pretty much taking current processes and digitizing it, making it you're putting bits and bytes around it. Whereas digital transformation is a few levels deeper, where you're actually looking at the processes, the associated metrics, the tools, and all of that, and then transforming the environment as well. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well as you go through this process.
It makes a lot of sense. And just to know, I've gotten in trouble many times for talking about fail fast, even though it's the right thing. So I always say accomplish change quickly. But fail fast is the appropriate way to look at it, just not to market it.
And especially, I know in industries which rely heavily on reliability, right, as the first thing. I think your point is well taken, Reid. What I want to talk about in general, right, as a concept with digital transformation, and this kind of leads us to the second part of our title, really. The three core areas that we've actually seen are, one is accelerating revenue growth, increasing asset uptime, and then we've also talked about improving risk posture. So these are sort of the broad result areas, and in recent times, to this we add a basic factor of sustainability that runs through all organizations. This is what we want to do. So, which leads me to my next question, which is really the first thought about software is that businesses base their decisions on these core anchors I just talked about, right? Increase revenue, including customer satisfaction, which is ROI, decrease costs, which is ROI, mitigate risk, and which is compliance. And then the last bit, which I said, is sustainability. So has this changed much? Have these factors changed in evaluating IT projects or application projects between the classical enterprise and this brave new world of digital transformation? How do you see this?
So I'll address that. They haven't changed, but there's been some addition to them and some other concerns. And one is that speed of success matters more. And that's happened more than the last couple of decades, as you've seen so many large IT efforts where some have been tremendous success years later, but now companies are expected to move faster. So the risk and the speed of the project is also included along with the ROI, risk mitigation, and sustainability. And again, sustainability is new. The other thing that I'd like to highlight is that there's a huge difference in the employee effect now. It used to be that we would look at a cost, is reducing costs as part of the ROI as being a focus, that we're going to take costs out of the business. We're going to take it by reducing the effort of employees. I think that's really kind of old thinking, because while that is a part of it, what matters more now is employee engagement, number one, and employment retention, number two. I think back to the days when we first put a laptop in the trucks in the utility that I was at. And it was rough going because we had a lot of damage to the laptops, mostly incurred by screwdrivers with frustrated people who didn't want to have technology next to them. Our people that are working now expect not to do the drudgery. And they get mad when they see that their personal technology is so far behind their business technology. Mm-hmm. So they expect it to work, and they will be more engaged at the rest of their job and expanding the success of their job if you actually give them some technology that is closer to what they have at home, that is able to do things that are different than filling out the forms, doing the busy work, things that they know that they're being paid kind of by the hour for because it's busy work and the company didn't care to give them the technology they need. So that's related to the ROI. But I think it's a really important thing that we always need to think of is that employee engagement and retention means a lot more now.
Yeah. Plus, in addition to that, like you said, Reid, there is a time to value, right? People are looking for results faster. And if you take the traditional view of how we put together ERP systems and other enterprise-wide systems, those were year-long projects. People took their time. There was a lot of time spent on designing the processes, and then configuring the systems, user testing, and so on. Today's environment, people are saying, okay, how can I get this up and running quickly and then get the value as well quickly? Now, more importantly, technologies available today, there's a bunch of AI coming into play today, right? So there is the ability to, harness a lot of the information that exists that can be done only through, digital transformation kind of projects, right? You have to automate, you have to start collecting that information, and that in turn will help you get to that value much faster.
If I can sort of take off from that too. So the two, one of the things, and it sounds, a bit trite when you say that, but no user has ever complained my software is too easy to use or my application, is not complex enough, right? And so when Krish, when you talk about ERP projects and Reid, when you talk about employee engagement, frequently the two are nowhere in the same discussion, right? Because oftentimes enterprise projects get sold in the boardrooms and the meeting rooms, but the world we live in, for instance, at Connixt, where it comes to the mechanics or the technicians, the folks out on the field, when it comes to the utility industry, the crew that goes out and uses this, and hence the screwdriver on the laptop, right? I think we're seeing a lot of that impacting how the current wave of digital transformation projects are actually, evaluated and handled. And to us, at least, the biggest portion of this is adoption rates, right? How many users are willing users, and how many of them are unwilling users? But there is no middle ground in the sense that we can't have people not using the system at all, which used to be the case with a lot of the larger enterprise projects. So it's an interesting sort of segue into I guess my next question, right? So with these projects that we talk about, these targeted digital transformation projects, especially as they relate to the nuts and bolts, right? The cloud mobile applications such as ours, really, that automate mission critical work on the field. These clearly deliver value to the end users, right? If it makes their life easier, if it is fewer, times of walking between the place of work and a laptop or a kiosk, or writing down on sheets of paper, with greasy hands, and then trying to enter that information into a backend system, clearly delivers value to them. But how do they justify this to an executive? I mean, if you are sitting there in the C-suite, how do you justify this? I somehow like to think that makes life easier for your end users. Is that a sufficient reason? And especially where it comes to integrating with backend systems and so on. I guess the basic question is, what is important for the line of business owner versus how does that same thing translate to a C-suite executive who has to make the decision about funding these things?
Yeah, so let me take a shot at that, right? So again, there are different levels of thinking at different levels of the organization. So if you take, we take an organization and split it into 5 levels where we say, hey, there's a corporate goal, which is maximizing shareholder value or maximizing the return on invested assets. Then you talk about an executive level set of metrics, which could be increasing margins, reducing costs, those kinds of metrics. And then subsequently, you delve down into management controls. What are the levers that go with the management controls? And then subsequently, the KPIs that go with the functions. It could be in the shop floor or the maintenance crew or whatever it is, right? So there is a spectrum of measurements and even compartmentalized thinking, if I may, where people are looking at these at different levels. So the guy on the shop floor could be worried about, overall equipment effectiveness, for example. How much am I how much should I be producing? What am I producing, and what are my losses? How do I improve that, or how do I improve my overall output and reduce my losses? Right. So that level of thinking, but you've got to be able to connect the dots and up level it as you go up the organization through the various levels of management, so that you cannot be speaking the language down at the very lowest level. You've got to be able to scale it up and put it in the perspective of the person making the decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Chris, I'd like to add on to this using your words from earlier in this broadcast. You were talking a bit about the difference between targeted digitalization and a digital transformation project. When you go up to the higher level, you tend to think of digital transformation and of the big picture and building the capability. There's some great software out there, there's great tools and whatever. And in a big firm, and as a CIO, I've only been in firms from 4 to 14 billion annual revenue. So the big firms, you're thinking about digitalization is my toolkit to put together and to have consistency with it as you go through. And one of the failures that we have historically had in big firms is that the decisions are made at the higher level. So we have failed to give digitalization where it matters at the lower level because we're more concentrated on the rollout of our tools, as opposed to a different point of view where we'd be more agile and have a key pass of the tools, but allow the digitalization to occur with the more targeted tools that don't require support as much, the SaaS type tools at a lower level. I have a brother who is currently working with a $100 million construction firm, and he doesn't have that much of an IT project. And the tools that they have are absolutely amazing, what he's been able to do with that. And he's focused on the digitalization of activities and has had a lot of success with that. While I, in the past, have focused on the digital transformation and actually have been guilty of holding up necessary projects because I was focusing on looking at the whole work. And while I could justify some of my actions in the past, some were good and some weren't, with the current level of tools, it's different. It's different. And you need to pay attention down below. It's like and I've said this before, in the past, I used to say, to justify this project, show me the cost savings. You're taking a fourth of a person's work away. Does that mean I actually pay that much less in salary? That's a naive way of looking at it, because I'm not looking at the fact that nowadays employee knowledge means a lot, and having their engagement to use that knowledge matters in. So you need to think of that. And then also, because I was always coming from the IT side, so I want to protect my own little domain. And I'm thinking about, I want these tools, and some of these, for the large firms, these resource planning tools you have are tremendous, and they're getting so they're not as bulky. But still, I would focus on those projects that would use the tools I have at hand, as opposed to see that there's tools out in the marketplace now that are SaaS oriented, that don't cost my IT department a lot of money, but could actually make other people's jobs a lot easier so that we can have a better return on that investment. So there is definitely a different viewpoint at different levels in the organization. And I think that many of us at the higher levels of the organizations have made a lot of mistakes in the past.
So that's a very frank admission there, Reid, because again, where we see, as somewhat sitting on this side of the table too, is for the line of business owner, right? To them, it is very granular in terms of, here is the cost of errors, right? Here is how I'm evaluated, right? Cost of errors, the number of inspection fails. They need to increase wrench time, increase asset availability uptime, which is a little bit at a higher level. But fundamentally, I think their objective is, can they simply let the workforce do what they're meant to do, as opposed to, data entry and so on and so forth. In the context of what you're saying, Reid, or how you were putting it, Krish, is, yes, those are important, but they're so granular, right? I mean, they're so down in the weeds. It doesn't adequately sort of translate all the way up to the top. If this were to be a prioritization project for, $1 billion corporation, or $4 or $5 or $10 billion company, it is so granular that I think it gets lost by the time it actually comes up to the C-level. It kind of leads me to the other question then. What does ROI mean for the CEO, the COO, the CFO, and the CIO? Because, I mean, here, I think one is the tangible versus the intangibles in evaluating these initiatives. Reid, you touched upon this briefly, which is sort of the HR impact, right? And something I like to call this is sort of the institutional IP, right? Can we retain the knowledge that my team is accumulating? And what if it is across multiple regions? That we talked about global tribal knowledge, for example, right? Across languages. And then the IT impact, and finally the agility. So be great if you both could kind of address these areas, right? For the different C-suite folks, and what does ROI mean there?
So again, going back to the 5 levels of the organization as an example that I mentioned, and the fact that the metrics get progressively up-leveled as you go from the shop floor up to the C-suite, right? It's important to keep that in perspective. So if you're passionate about your metrics and the fact that you're going to improve labor utilization or some metric, the message I would send out to my team if I was the executive making the decision would be, hey, you need to up-level your thinking as well. Don't just think of that sliver, because I'm sure there are other intangibles or other tangible benefits that can be captured with this project. So as an example, you mentioned, Satish, that the tribal knowledge, right? So if I'm able to go through a digital transformation where I'm able to digitize a lot of the learnings that or maintenance tasks that people are doing, right? It solves 2 problems. One, it gives me a good repository of techniques to use when a problem arises, first of all. Secondly, my mean time to get to identifying the problem gets reduced, because now I can troubleshoot much faster and fix the problem much faster, because I've got this repository of stuff that people have put into. And then most importantly, you have the ability to improve your training as well for your workforce. So if somebody leaves, that knowledge is not completely lost, right? So all of these factors become key, but the most important message for me would be expand your thinking. Don't just think of your sliver of it. Open it up to think about, oh, by the way, these are the other benefits, so that I can translate it into something much, much higher.
I do want to ask kind of a follow-on question to that, and this is sort of, and this is extremely related to this too, right? There is this constant with larger businesses, larger corporations especially, but we've seen this with some mid-sized ones too, where they're using legacy technology and simply there is no money to now move to newer technology or anything. But this age-old question of make versus buy, and best of breed versus core application. So there is a cost impact to that. We constantly hear this. End users say that this is functionality I'd like to have, but it's with all due respect, it's never going to fly past IT, right? I mean, we've seen this because there is there is a technology tax to be paid, because this is all stuff that we've had accumulated over the years. Who's going to unwind this? Who's going to sort of go through this and do this? And of course, there is not invented here. I mean, there is a range of these issues that come up, which frankly leaves the end user, the folks on the field, the actual users, kind of frustrated that it doesn't matter what I think is good, doesn't matter if it's going to make it easy for me, it's never going to fly. So this is somewhat an IT related question, because ultimately these are, IT has to bless this. So your perspective would be super interesting.
Yeah, so I'll offer my perspective. And of course, it's changed when I was young. So I've been guilty of the wrong way of thinking. But I believe that, again, you need a central force, an IT, that is very good at knowing things that are particular to your firm that give you a competitive advantage. You need to know your data and its architecture. You need to know your integrations, your integration capability. You need to also know and have hands on your security. And that's key. That's the role of IT, is strategically important. Now, I'd also in the past said that I need to know my architecture, I need to define it tightly and have all my tools there. I think that part of the equation has changed in the last decade or two. And it's more important to learn to be agile and to be able to let things happen quickly so that you can actually provide something to the business. I'll give an example. Decade and a half ago, with OGE Energy Core, our biggest unit was a utility, and we're putting basically a computer on every house, AMI system. So we're putting that in as brand new technology, and we were one of the lowest producers of in cost of energy in the country. We had to do it very cost efficiently. In my own IT department that I had absolute control over, we were failing. And I eventually moved my whole enterprise architecture department into the program for the smart grid, we called it, because my architects were holding us up. And rather than understanding that they had their role in what's unique to us, they didn't need to have that role to be limiting so that we couldn't use new technology that made something. And that by changing that, we actually made it so that we were capable of getting some new ideas. There's a gentleman called Mike Farrell, a few levels down in the customer relations department, that came up with an idea, which was a demand shifting for energy. And I won't go into it much, but because we were able to use the existing tools that we had, some SaaS tools on top of that, we were able to have an idea that was key in making it so that we had the highest 5-year shareholder return of any large utility in the Electric Institute. And that's all because we figured that our role was to be good only what we're good at, and then use modern tools for the rest. I relate this also going back to when I was younger and had a little hair, that Bruce Porter was there in his book Comparative Advantage and talking about how important it is for a company to be strategically on focus, and that's the role of senior management. And then you had Peter Drucker come up, and he simply went up and said, well, culture beats strategy, or eats strategy for breakfast, and understood that it's not just where we focus, but it's how we focus and how we get a culture that's going to build our business that matters. So you see how I had talked about people before and engagement. I think that the role of the big company is not to do the work and not to limit the tools, but to guide and make available so that the modern tools that don't take a lot of support, you need to be smart there, you need to be smart in security, can make it so that you can have the targeted improvements you need and actually have this target digitalization, which will increase your bottom line significantly.
And if I can add to that, Reid, I'd like to weave in the human aspect of it as well, right? I mean, we all go around thinking that we need the accolades for any ideas, right? So it may be that you have a pet peeve, or you realize that a particular solution would be very useful to you. And traditionally, you've been stonewalled by the finance organization or the IT organization. Co-op them. You don't necessarily have to be the person saying, I'm leading the charge. You could give the credit to the others. You could say, hey, we were brainstorming this, and as I was explaining my problem, so-and-so from IT or so-and-so from finance said, hey, we could do this. And so it becomes their idea. And in the end, you're going to reap the benefits because the metrics that are going to be improved are yours. Right? So it doesn't matter. It's really, how do you get to the end goal? It really doesn't matter. So if you weave that part of it, I found that to be pretty successful across my career, right? Where I give the credit to somebody else, but I get what I want in the end.
Yeah. And I appreciate, I'm sorry, but I appreciate what you said about people. I don't care if you manage IT or anything else, success comes through people. You need to liberate people, let them move, give them the rules that they can work in, but make those rules to be loose enough so that they can use modern tools that don't violate key principles or securities and let them work. And you get wonder for that. I mean, I have awards where I took the credit for people that just did something and I didn't even know they were doing it. And that's fine. And that's what success does if you're in leadership, and especially in IT leadership.
So Satish, one of the things we could do is actually, I can share the matrix, which takes it all the way from the KPIs to the corporate objectives and shows the linkage across each of these dimensions, right? The 5 levels, and we could post that up on your website for people to leverage as appropriate.
Oh, that's a great idea, Krish. We'll get that done right after this event. We'll put it up there, and people should take a look at it. It is a fairly comprehensive approach to looking at this. As KPI moves through different levels, right? Makes sense. It leads me kind of as we sort of end, and we have a couple of viewer questions coming in, but the one kind of last thought about this. So we've talked about the benefits of doing some of these projects, or how to address the ROI, the compliance, the risk posturing out of all of this, right? But we talk of risk. What is the risk of not doing something today? Simply because there is no material impact or ROI or risk today. The question is, in many ways, and we saw this over the during the shutdowns and all of that, right? I mean, things that we don't anticipate, right? But the companies that were already on the path to digital transformation, weathered this much better than others who did not. So if you could both address this as a concept, right? It is not just, it's the ROI and the risk for today, but then what is the cost of not doing it today?
The answer.
Yes.
You'll become the company of the type that I tend to invest in, which loses value quickly because more aggressive people come over and take over. And somehow, no matter how smart I think I am, I catch the wrong ones. If you want to be relevant, you're going to learn to be aggressive and quick.
I think a perfect response, actually.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you'll be left in the dust, and you're really not helping yourself by not even thinking about these things, right? More importantly, it's acknowledging that the world is moving on, and you better keep pace. But secondly, it's being able to be truthful to yourself and say, I need to be doing some of these things to continue surviving and satisfying my shareholders. I mean, big or small company, it really doesn't matter, right? You have a vested interest or an obligation to run your business the way it should be run.
I will sort of end this with the anecdote before we jump into a couple of questions we had from viewers. But this is so critical, right? We've talked about the C level. We talked about culture, right? So the question of what happens when I do this great project, which saves either a boatload of money for my business, or which makes us more efficient or anything. So I think we've seen this happen in the past, that, hey, I can't project these kinds of savings because someone is going to ask me the question, why was it so inefficient in the past? And these are real questions that come through. And I think it is a cultural issue. It is easy to blame the individual for thinking that way. But I think it's a cultural issue where they're fearful of actually showing great results, or showing up somebody for saying, hey, we should have done this earlier. I mean, why not? But the other thing that we've seen, and this is, it's comical, but it's also kind of tragic when people say, well, hey, I can't become that efficient because that means I need fewer resources to work on this particular thing. And, that sort of, brings my budget down, or brings, even worse, it actually brings my utilization rates down. It actually impacts what I can bill, and so on and so forth. I think it's absolutely a failure in culture and how organizations do, because again, we've talked about relevance, right? I mean, if you don't do this today, your competition is actually doing it there already. And it's not even in your neighborhood, halfway across the world, somebody's already doing it this way. And I think that's the real challenge. So anyway, I think we could expound for a few hours on just, these challenges. I want to dive into a couple of quick questions before we wrap up the session. So one, I'm a business owner of a mid-sized business. Okay, so should this approach be different for smaller businesses than larger ones? And keeping in mind that uh, a small business could be as small as a few $1,000,000 to 100 million or whatever. So the broad question is, should this approach what we've discussed here, how does this scale across organizations, large or small?
Okay, so even though I come from the large and not the small, let me just make one comment. And I was waiting for you, Krish, and then I saw you start to figure out when I was. So I'm sorry about that. But I believe that in small, you get the same problem we get in the large. And that is be careful about increasing your maintenance costs. So do the digitalization, but look for software as a service. Look for capabilities that you have where you're not going to add a whole bunch of support as you move towards the digitalization. That to me, that's a key to keep your mind on in small business.
And I would probably add that it's perhaps a little easier for a smaller business to think about changing, depending again on the maturity of the organization compared to a much, much, much larger organization, right? Because there is baggage, there is hierarchy, there is all kinds of controls in place that prohibit you from doing things that may not exist in a smaller environment. So that's a perspective to keep in mind as well.
And we have time just for this one more question. Any others that are in here we'll address later after the event, certainly. How do you factor in, I guess it goes back to one of the questions I had earlier, how do you factor in legacy IT? Should we keep adding to the stack to make it work or find the money to migrate? I mean, this is a hard dollar question. I mean, it all boils down to dollars. Should they en masse, wait till everything migrates to a new environment, or should they at least make do with what they have? I mean, any thoughts there, General? I have a perspective I'll offer that last, but
to me is exactly what I said before. Okay, that you have some technology that you're going to have to maintain or phase out. You need to do that. But when you look strategically at your IT department, you need to say, what do I want to be very good at and keep in house? Mm-hmm. And you want to be very good about knowing your data and knowing how you're going to integrate it, knowing how it's architected. You want to know very good about maintaining your security. But the tools that you have, the tools that are actively used, you want to maintain. But as you grow, you don't want to become a maintenance shop. So you want to find more tools beyond the core that you have now that you won't be stuck with maintenance. Your goal is not to provide just one user's breadth of tools and you don't want to spend 70% of your money on maintenance.
Sure. Makes sense.
Yeah. Plus, you have to balance it out, right? You don't want a proliferation of various solutions or software as a service solutions on the one side, and then you try to help. You need somebody managing each and every one of those on the inside as well. So that's a fine balance. That's on one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is in today's environment, it's very easy to connect systems, right? In API calls, you're able to connect to legacy systems, and so that integration layer has been simplified quite a bit. So to the extent that you can get up and running on some of these software as a service solutions faster than you would trying to rip out the guts of your legacy systems. I mean, so it's a fair balancing act, I guess.
So the one perspective I have on all of this, and we deal a lot with transportation sector, so it kind of fits in there. All of us, when we drive our cars, right? Some of them, we retain old ones for sentimental value, but whatever reason, or you simply don't want to change now. So the question is really, we know that next year we're going to change the car we drive, or a year and a half from now we're going to change the car we drive. Should we maintain it today, or should we check the brake pads, and should we actually change oil, or should we just let it go to waste and then figure out this later? Because who wants to put in more money into this asset that you're ultimately going to retire? And I think it is a fine balance between saying, there is a nice to haves that you can probably make do without. But then there is the fundamentals of saying that I still want to get from point A to point B safely. And if there is a way I can do that without consuming as much gas, or in these days as much electric charge as I otherwise would, I think that's a smart decision to make then. No one wants to stop maintaining and drive something unsafe, and nobody willfully says, if I can save X amount of dollars on gas or on charge, then I should do this. So again, I guess to that extent, it goes back to the safety, the risk posture. I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about, and then the savings that might actually accrue from doing the smart thing. So I'll stop there with my analogies. I mean, I don't want to keep going there, but it's at least a thought. But other than that, I mean, we've actually gone a little bit over time, but I do want to thank you so much, Krish and Reid, for your time today. This has been a very interesting conversation, and it feels exactly like a great discussion. It was just great hearing you gentlemen talk about the things that you've done, and frankly, a couple of areas where you think, at least Reid, you were talking about the younger you versus the, well, let me say the newer you, and and. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for
Newer, not older.
There you are. Thank you for all the perspective we have today. And I know there's going to be more questions coming in. This is going to live on LinkedIn Live and on our YouTube channel and so on. So again, as the questions come in, we'll respond to those. But thank you both so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And we'll catch up again soon. And we'll pop the matrix you provided, Krish, on our website. Anyone that is interested, please go there and download it. It's a terrific document to review.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Krish, Satish.
See you.